abundance is not some collectivist, socialist, dark, dystopian, USSR, blah, blah, blah. Abundance is the hidden store we've not talked about. Abundance actually is far more capital efficient than even capitalism, which can be capital efficient eventually. So I think this is the story that needs to be told, that it's not collectivist, it's not socialist and, hey comrade, how's your bowl of rice going? Like, actually, when people have their basic needs met and they meet together and they build things out of love, out of joy, out of an intrinsic creativity, we have a much richer world.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Love Conquers Fear podcast. I'm recording this right after getting back from Josh Baer's place in Cabo. He was on episode 3, which was great. In that gathering that we had, which is an annual gathering for the Henry Crown Fellowship for the men in the group, it was a men's weekend. It's only the second annual time we've done it. One of our readings for the offsite was the beginning of Life 3.0. by Max Tegmark, which is the tale of the Omegas. It was a really interesting coincidence, I would say synchronicity, shout out to the book, The Celestine Prophecy by James Redfield, one of my favorites. But it was a really interesting synchronicity that we're reading that piece and discussing it on the same week that Moltbook is going totally viral. And so we brought that into the discussion, and with today's guest, I'm sure we'll unpack Moltbook. But if you're not familiar with it, as of this recording, there are 1.5 million autonomous agents in a Reddit-like environment that's kind of walled off that are conversing with each other. And a lot of people are freaking out, people being humans in this case, that they're sentient and that they're plotting against us and they're creating their own language to disguise from us, etc. I'm with Mustafa Suleiman on this one, that I think they're feigning sentience or consciousness extremely well. And it's still early innings. I mean, remember, as of this recording, that we're barely 3 years after the launch of ChatGPT. That was November 30th of 2022. And we're in the exponential of exponential curves. But anyways, it was a really vigorous discussion that we had at the Henry Crown Fellowship Men's Weekend. And it was just very interesting, the synchronicity between me reading that Max Tegmark piece for the first time. I'm now working my way through the rest of Life 3.0. I've been recommended that book quite a few times, including by Manoj Saxena, who was on the last episode of the podcast. It was written in 2017, and so I was kind of not really running towards reading it because I thought it's really dated. But Max Tegmark is very much a genius and really was envisioning all the different scenarios that could happen in the future. And it's a really, really interesting read. And the tale of the Megas, the way the book starts out, is essentially that a bunch of engineers in kind of a conspiracy type of way get together and create AGI and then essentially attempt to rule the world and all of the things that happen as a result of it. And it's not your typical dystopian tinge to it. It's more like the benevolent dictator type scenario, I would say, that they think they know best, similar to the way that, we constructed in this country, that senators have kind of superpower rights over, Congress, and we have the balance of powers, but obviously the Supreme Court plays a big role. So it really makes you think. It's a very interesting piece. I think it's completely unrealistic with how much people are moving from AI company to AI company and how much they're getting paid. I don't think it's realistic that there's one company that will invent AGI and then others won't. I think that there will be lots of companies that once we get to the AGI moment, maybe one company comes out with it first, and then the next week another one comes out with it, just because there's so much cross-pollination. That's my belief, at least. And I also just don't think conspiracy theories of that magnitude are realistic, because someone's going to leak at some point, and in the Max Tegmark story, they end up not leaking for a very, very long period of time, like years to decades. And I just don't think that's the way it would actually happen. But it's a fun thought experiment. If you haven't read it, it's worthwhile. If you just buy the Life 3.0 book, it's at the beginning of it. And then the second thing is that, all of that coincided with the same week that Dario Amodei came out with The Adolescence of Technology, which I talked about on the last 2 episodes, and we'll get into today. Because today I have one of the world's leading AI experts and a good friend. So welcome, Peter. Yeah.
Hey, thanks for having me, Brett.
Hey, it's so good to have you here. Yeah, thank you so much for showing up for this during this really important time in humanity's future.
I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I think we're going to have a lot of fun.
I would love to establish you as an entrepreneur because you're one of our best entrepreneurs in Austin.
Thanks.
And let's just talk about your company for a moment and how you got to this point in your career.
I arrived in Austin 22 years ago, and I came here really in, I would say, the journeyman phase of my software engineering career. And I did consulting for a number of years using the Python programming language, and in the infancy, adolescence of the scientific and numerical Python sort of movement. And towards the end of the aughts, I started realizing that these Python tools are being used by people outside of science. They're being used in finance and all sorts of places in industry. And I realized that with cloud computing and with big data, there was going to be this emergent set of needs that really needed vastly more powerful business data analytics tools. And that led me to founding Anaconda.
Yep.
And we founded it was called Continuum Analytics, but we changed the name a few years later to Anaconda. After the
much better name.
Much better name.
I remember when it was Continuum.
It was Continuum Analytics. And it was sort of like, because I remember we had sushi at, I think, Mako downtown with me and Travis and you, early days. And we're trying to, get advice from, an established entrepreneur like yourself about, product versus services and how to do all these things. But we built, we started the company with a thesis that was very much unproven at the time, but we believed fundamentally that Python would be a democratizing force for allowing people who are not software engineers like Java or C++ people. We believe there's a lot more people who wanted to do data analysis, who wanted to make things with code, especially data-driven things, than could learn C++ or Java. So we felt that Python was a great tool for them, and we wanted to dramatically increase the adoption of Python for data purposes. And we felt that we could build a really great company seated in the open source community, because all of these innovations that were being built in Python and that were displacing very expensive tools in business, they were created by volunteers. I mean, grad students, assistant professors, nights and weekends. This was not your classic, you throw a few $1 million at them and they'll build something cool.
Right.
This was people coming together as a community orchestra, if you will, right? And they were creating these wonderful tools that played well with each other, quickly expanded to cover a lot of use cases. And as a collective, this Python open source ecosystem was very, very powerful. And it was powerful in a democratization of technology way. And this will be important as we talk about AI, right?
Yeah.
So we had this thesis that there was this moment for Python to really become this next generation data analysis language built on this open ecosystem, the open source ecosystem. So we started the company to build products and services around that.
Right.
Fast forward, 14 years later, our thesis was proven quite correct, right? People took to Python. They started using Python for doing data analysis in the era of big data and cloud computing. Python's become the sort of de facto language for data and ML. And then, of course, with the advent of deep learning, and then early AI stuff in the 2015-16 timeframe, Python started becoming the tool of choice.
Yep.
And
you made the right bet.
We made the right bet, but sort of be the change you want to see in the world, right? If we hadn't done it, it'd be something else.
Right.
But because we did it, we put it there, and you'd see things like, for instance, Torch was written originally in Lua. Torch then had to become PyTorch because everyone's using Python, right? TensorFlow, originally C++, they had to wrap it with Python because everyone's using Python. And so we definitely created, and I would say laid the groundwork for this open source movement to expand into really the foundations of modern ML and AI.
Yeah.
And through that journey, of course, my personal entrepreneurial journey, which I think is the origin of your question, I've had to do every job. As we know, founders, you have to do every job, right? So I've been basically in every role: sales, services lead, consultant. I started as the CTO did a stint 4 years as CEO, took us through a couple of rounds, and now I'm sort of, I think the term is transcended founder, which means I get to be everyone's problem.
Right.
But actually, I am leading our really our AI strategy and sort of those kind of innovation efforts. That's kind of my day job. But also, I still play a very heavy role in terms of technical strategy and working with the community and so on and so forth.
At this point, it's one of Austin's unicorns as well.
It is. That's right.
I remember at the last time we saw each other, we were at this amazing dinner with other entrepreneurs, including Bob Metcalf.
That's right.
Founder of TheoryCon, where we were discussing the future of AI.
That's right. That was a fun conversation.
Oh my gosh, it was so much fun. And you shared with us, hey, there's going to be some news pretty soon. You didn't share with us what it was, and then I saw it hit, and it just made my heart sing for you and for Austin. So much. And no, I mean, I am an entrepreneur through and through. I've been an entrepreneur since I was 24 years old. I'm about to turn 54 on Valentine's Day, and I know how hard it is. And we should one thing that'll go by most people that are listening to this that haven't been entrepreneurs is 14 years. That's a long time, but that's how long sometimes these things take. Like, it's not the overnight success.
Very few are, and the overnight things are oftentimes not durable. Right. Structurally, if there was an opportunity to give you that overnight success, lots of other people pay attention very quickly. Right. And the thing is true with ChatGPT. You mentioned it's only been 3 years since the chattening, and look at all the things that have happened. Right? Obviously, OpenAI has done very, very well, but some key people at OpenAI left and created their biggest competitor, Anthropic. And then meanwhile, Google's come along and done a full shakeup, and they are in the race. With all their
Sergey
stuff.
Brin coming back.
They're like, this is a make or break moment for us. So you can take a multi-$100 billion company, now $1 trillion company, and turn around, not quite on a dime, but as big orgs go, pretty much on a dime to tackle the opportunity. So those overnight successes are, I mean, it's great if you hit one, but oftentimes, if you want to build a really good, durable business, it takes a long time. It just does.
Yeah, and just to mark this moment too, from just kind of a size perspective of capital, last year when President Trump announced Project Stargate, which was $500 billion in funding. He announced that alongside Mayoshi-san, Sam Altman, Larry Ellison. That $500 billion of funding towards the creation of AGI, and the data centers to support it, that was already more inflation adjusted than we spent on the Manhattan Project to win World War II. And it was more inflation adjusted than we spent on the space race versus the Russians. Since that moment in time, here we are in 2026, there's been around $7 trillion of additional announcements throughout the world, including the UAE. So we are in very unprecedented territory. And I think that a big part of that is hope, like let's create the end of disease. Let's create a world of unlimited energy. Let's create, abundance that we can't imagine. I think a big part of it's fear too, like fear of if China gets AGI before us, it's all over for us. And, kind of the Max Tegmark scenario in Life 3.0, you heard the opener here. That China becomes the Omegas and we fear them, and they have this unprecedented takeoff, and so a big part of it is fear as well.
For sure,
that this is the moment, and so we're just in this time where, for Deborah and I as investors in startups, one of the hats I wear, we're in 150 startups and 50 VC funds. We've been doing this for 16 years. I think that there's so many companies flying close to the what I'll call the sun of the frontier models, and it's like Icarus. That I think probably 90 to 95% of these AI application companies are going to go out of business, and so to your point about durability, that's the number one thing we're asking ourselves when we're investing now is do we really believe in our heart of hearts that this is going to get us to abundance? And B, is this durable in this AI moment, or is it going to get blotted out? And kind of, it's like the Microsoft Windows problem, multiplied by 100 or whatever.
Well, and the big AI, the big frontier model companies, although they look like a sun that you shouldn't fly close to, they are in
An existential race.
they have an existential issue as well, right? There's just so many. I mean, the last paragraph of sentences you said, we could do an hour-long podcast on every single one of them.
That's
so
right.
I'm trying to distill in my mind what are the most salient things here. I would say that I'm really glad to hear you say that funding is inspired by fear, and I think it is a Red Queen problem to some extent. So the Red Queen problem, in Alice in Wonderland, the faster you run, you have to run faster and faster to stay in place. Right. I think the issue that we see here is we have this technical innovation that happened with LLMs, with deep learning, with certainly the Transformers model. We have actually this incredible unlock that is intrinsically abundant. What I mean by that is unlike the Manhattan Project, where you had to do a lot of really hard work to get a little bit of the radioactive materials to make a bomb, and bombs are intrinsically they're sort of zero-sum things in the sense that if I blow up a bomb over your city's gone.
Right.
If you blow up a bomb over my city's gone.
Right.
And I don't get it back instantly, right? Like these are bad things. This seems like a stupid thing to say, but weapons, bombs, all these things, they're intrinsically subtractive.
Right.
Right. But actually these LLMs, if you have an LLM and you're able to live your life better, that doesn't hurt me any if I have an LLM too.
Right.
And given these LLMs are really just matrix multiplies on a pile of human knowledge that's all in the public commons, I'm not taking any knowledge away from you.
Right.
So we have this thing that was dropped upon us that could not be more of a technological manna from heaven.
That's
and what you're seeing now with all these dollar figures being thrown around, ultimately, there is an aspect of geopolitical fear that policymakers and others have gotten into this belief of like, well, if they get AGI, ... they will make, unbeatable advances. There'll be this fast takeoff, or they will make, chemical weapons or biological weapons, or they'll hack off all our cyber systems, or any list of things you can use to scare politicians and the public with.
Right.
Right. And there's always this ... Right. Like you and I both know as like software people and computer people, like there's a lot of things that go wrong in a ... between like, oh, we have an AGI to I've scaled it up to where I'm able to do all these nefarious things.
Right.
But even if we just skip that and say, okay, maybe they're somewhat justified in their fears and they do want to get to they want to stay on the frontier of capability. What's really driving a lot of those dollars being thrown around is they're afraid that their investors are not going to get exponential returns on the money they've already thrown into it.
That's right. And they have to live up to valuations that are so unprecedented.
Yeah.
And capital outlays that are so unprecedented.
And the argument that's sometimes made is, well, all they have to do is unlock one cancer drug or discover hair treatment for men. Like you take one pill and boom, your hair comes back. That's $100 billion company right there, easily, right? But at the same time, whatever they discover, whatever things they use, it's always techniques and algorithms applied to data. Data is actually the really important thing here.
For sure. Yep.
And getting that data is non-trivial. Yeah. Digitizing and doing better, higher quality data processing, those are non-trivial tasks.
Yeah.
The fact that we started with this large amount of source data to drive these chatbots and all this open source code that's out there that drives the coding LLMs, all of that stuff comes from the public, the commons, right? It was available for free. That's why these people got this immense amount of lift.
Right.
It's not obvious at all that the next stages in drug discovery, the next stages in material science, all these things that require wet lab or actual people with like really hot molten crucibles of God knows what trying to do things, it's not clear that can be accelerated really at the same kind of speed. Right. So the investors who went in on those big valuations with these hopes and dreams sold to them, at some point, things have to get marked to market.
That's right.
And the game that we've always played in America is when enough people are upside down on investment, the government bails them out. The Fed bails them out. And we've played this game. We're still in the middle of the great financial crash in 2008. That never ended.
Yep.
We just doubled down on it with COVID.
Yep.
And, everything we're seeing in terms of the populist backlash to the, I will say, neoliberal consensus, since the Clinton era, all of that, the chickens are going to come home to roost.
Right.
And we are going to have a situation where our financial system cannot absorb another couple $1 trillion level bailout.
Right.
Maybe it can, but people are going to be super pissed.
Right.
When they actually realize what's going on. And so I think, anyway, we've kind of gone a bit further afield.
Yeah, no, but this
I
is
do think that this is the real thing because do you need $500 billion to unlock the thing? I mean, you talked about Moltbook and OpenClaw, right? The project underneath it. That's like two dudes, right?
Right.
Like Moltbook is one dude, right? OpenClaw started accumulating a few more people, but when I was taking a step back, when I had my interview with Lex Friedman right before actually the ChatGPT moment, I talked about how the interesting thing for me as an entrepreneur was that the general capitalist mindset and the investor mentality and the demand for exponential returns and all these things that we have in call it the modern financial system, the American way of investing, all of these things are rooted on a theory of value and value creation that's ultimately rooted in a scarcity mindset.
Right.
But the open source community, and you use the word abundance, which I love, right? The era of abundance. How do we get to that? Well, there's something, it's the fault lies not in the stars, but in ourselves, right? We have scarcity dynamics. We have this kind of subtractive approach and the zero-sum approach in the world at scale because we don't start looking at abundance in the small. So when you have someone collaborating with someone else for free, building a thing, giving it out to others for free, that small moment of giving and of operating in an abundance mentality, that then when put on substrate like the internet and GitHub and these kinds of things, you end up with open source communities providing or creating tremendously large amounts of value. And I said to Lex Friedman, I said, imagine if you were to go back to Paris in the 1800s, 1700s, and you were to go to King Louis whatever, right? And you say, I've invented a magic scythe. One farmer working for one Sunday afternoon with the scythe can harvest all of the wheat to feed all of Paris for a year. Okay, how valuable would that be? That scythe would be immensely valuable, right? And so when we look at, the scientific Python community that built the software tools that power all of this modern machine learning and data science and AI, you can fit them in a bus. You have to provide them food, shelter, water, but for a very small amount of money, you get this extreme expansion of productivity. So abundance is not some collectivist, socialist, dark, dystopian, USSR, blah, blah, blah. Abundance is the hidden story we've not talked about. Abundance actually is far more capital efficient than even capitalism, which can be capital efficient eventually, right? So I think this is the story that needs to be told, that it's not collectivist, it's not socialist and, hey, comrade, how's your bowl of rice going? Like, no, actually, when people have their basic needs met and they meet together and they build things out of love, out of joy, out of an intrinsic creativity, we have a much richer world. If we come in and try to extract exponentials out of everything they're doing, then the mechanisms of extraction actually damage the fruit and then lead to a much more impoverished landscape. So I think this is the thing I want to center on in our conversation about how do we get to an AI-powered abundance, right? And I would challenge you with the question of maybe we already live in the era of abundance. And we are just bad at allocating things.
We do, and I've covered that in episodes with Jamie Metzel, with Byron Reese. Yes, it's a distribution problem already. I mean, we have enough food actually for everybody in the world if we just figured out distribution. But you and I actually are so aligned on this, like more than I knew we would be, because that is the whole premise of the podcast and the book. The book, which is coming out later this year, is Love Conquers Fear, Humanity, AI, and the Age of Abundance for All. And I start out talking about an Uber driver I met from Chad. Chad has a GDP of $660 a person versus ours is around $86,000 in the US. And the hope to create abundance for a place like Chad has to be through AI, robotics, quantum computing, brain-computer interfaces. It's got to be through, as you said, this distribution, which is actually bigger than anything we've known in capitalism. And the biggest problem for us getting to that age, I think it's inevitable that we get to that age with one asterisk. And the asterisk is the zero-sum, fear-based scarcity mindset, which, as I've covered on this podcast, we as Homo sapiens have been around for around 300,000 years on planet Earth. The Earth is 4.54 billion years old, right? The universe, around 13.8 billion years old, but we found out through the James Webb Telescope it's older than that. So who actually knows?
Yeah.
It's a long time.
We don't have a working theory of gravity. Let's not get ahead of ourselves and figure out how big the universe is, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I know get into time too, and The Order of Time by Carlo Rovelli is one of my favorite books. Phenomenal read. We've only had electricity as Homo sapiens for 0.1% of our evolutionary time. 99.9% of our time. We have not even had electricity. And so the amygdala, the fear-based center of our brain, is highly developed.
Yep.
And we have to get over this mindset as we approach the frontier of abundance.
Yeah.
That is our biggest risk. And as I've laid out on this podcast, I'm 95% certain that we make it. That there's a question of how big does the forcing function need to be for us to wake up and realize we're genetically 99.9% the same all over the world, and this is the great unifying event. And in the lattice, I gave you a copy of my science fiction novella today. I envision a positive scenario for how that happens, how we unite, and then what happens afterwards. I think we need a lot more positive science fiction right now as opposed to all the dystopian. And so I'm trying to be part of the light with that. But I'm curious, how you really think about how, as humanity, we're going to make it actually to abundance versus the downside scenario of the AI dystopian narrative of the Eliezer Yudkowskis. It's all over. We're all dead. Type of thing.
Yeah, I have a hard time buying theories of the future, paintings of the future from people who've not really had to ship a lot of things through reality.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that as just like casual shade. What I mean is that the learnings I had to go through as an entrepreneur and change management in just getting a simple idea through to an organization of a few hundred people.
Yeah.
What I think is simple, but for someone embodied within the ranks, they're getting things from all sides, right? There's just all of these things that are just not clean, right? About the way that, the author of The Little Prince, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, wrote that this great line in Wind, Sand, and Stars. He wrote, there is but one veritable problem, and that is the problem of human relations. And that is, as a technologist, a hardcore science guy, growing up, I find that to be extremely true. And it's true in the small, when you're trying to coordinate a couple of people in a small team. It's also true writ large.
Right.
As humanity, what is the story we tell about ourselves? And how do we then make sure there's some integrity in that story so that we can then play through in our communities and in our families, in our lives, our personal lives? How do we actually play through so we can understand what is our place in this large-scale civilization? You talk about the fact that how do we get the lesser developed parts of the world to a place where the children there are not starving, are not suffering from disease, that for whatever reason we're just blessed with riches in terms of intelligence and artistry and creativity, right? There's good comedians, good artists, great cooks, great musicians, great scientists, amazing mathematicians that come from every corner of the world.
Right.
My father...
Genius is distributed.
Genius is distributed everywhere, right? We need to look at this and say, hey, we happen to be at the top of the food chain here in the West and in America, certainly, and people like you and I who've been successful entrepreneurs with lots of resources. It is just right that we look at this world and say, how do we surface all of that? How do we help not just reduce misery and suffering, but how do we really create the change that needs to happen in the world so that these areas become their own fertile zones of development, and then people can live great lives and bring a lot of joy and have a lot of meaning in their lives in whatever cultural context they may be in.
Right.
My father, I'm actually a first-generation immigrant, so I came here. I was born in China. My father lived through the Cultural Revolution, the Great Leap Forward, the famine. I mean, he has stories about literally eating dirt. Okay, and he's one of the smartest people I've ever met. He's an absolute, just brilliant math and physics guy, and he was born in the dirt in Jiangxi province. Why? If you're an angel in heaven, sprinkling down genius among all the unborn babies, right? Why would you dump a bunch into this back hole, literally dirt little province, or not province, a little rural village in backwoods of Jiangxi. Like, why would you? That seems like a waste, but it's not. It's that in every human, there is tremendous amount of potential. Not everyone will be an Einstein. Not everyone will be, Mozart, but we don't need everyone to be that either.
Right.
So I think this is where, when you think about intrinsically the moral obligation, a lot of people in the world have religions which give them the North Star. I think as someone who's an atheist and lives, in a very secular worldview, it is, you don't need much more than maybe the categorical imperative or something to say, but for the grace of God or something. That could have been me there, and it was me. It was my dad. One generation removed,
and look what it led to.
Look what it led to, right? So I think there's just this intrinsic thing about what's really needed. If we solve from needs and not from wants, right? If we solve for needs, what's really needed to give everyone clean water, good food, safety, right? Basic things like that. And at every step, what we find is that the things that prevent those from happening are vestiges of hangovers of institutions that are corrupt and failing, theories of how humans collaborate that simply don't work, theories of economics and the demand for exponential compounding return on returns that create a neurotic level of consumer desire. All these kinds of things are predatory dynamics, and we call them egregores or we call them Moloch. There's these like suprahuman dynamics that emerge in human societies and cultures. Those are the things that are preying upon this and eating away the opportunity for abundance to blossom.
Right. So in terms of, what do you think is going to be the catalyst for us to make it to that age? I've tried to envision it. I mean, one of the first part of the lattice actually came for me through a psychedelic journey where I was like, brain-computer interfaces would lead to unification of humanity understanding the actual reality we're living in. And that once that scientifically was proven, that we come from, I'm very spiritual. I deeply believe in God. You could call it God, the great intelligence of the universe, or consciousness. I mean, I'm not professing to understand the nature of God, but I do think that's where we get the concept of love from.
So I'm also very spiritual, but not religious in a traditional religion kind of way,
I totally understand. And actually, I've in my study of scripture, reading the Bhagavad Gita, the Tao Te Ching, a lot of ancient scripture, Kabbalah, etc., the Zohar, I've looked for the common root, which this common root is essentially that we need to realize our actual reality is one of love. That leads you into selfless service. It leads you into realizing that anger and all of these other negative emotions come from fear. And so allow love to conquer your own fear. And, you can get there through stoicism. You don't have to walk a spiritual path necessarily to get there. And then you're able to help other people do that.
Right.
And then if everybody did that, well, humanity ascends. I mean, without a doubt, right? Then it's 100% certainty we get to abundance. But right now, the power structures are such that there is so much dystopian fear out there. I mean, I don't know how you look at this, but ChatGPT launches November 30th. It was 4 months later that the pause all AI development moratorium call came. 37,000 people signed that 4 months later, right?
Right.
And I went on a bunch of podcasts and I was like, this is absolutely ridiculous. Like, this would be like Peter's tribe discovering fire and saying, sorry, Brett, you can't have it. Like, the technology is too good to create abundance for people not to have. And that it was going to be our clear path actually to get there to abundance, that this acceleration, Dimas Hassibis winning the Nobel Prize for, Google DeepMind's AlphaFold, which decodes the protein folding problem. And if we could capture just 18 seconds of the sun's rays that fall on Earth, 18 seconds through material science breakthrough, that would power the world's energy needs for over a year. Like, it's like whatever you want to call that force, put the bright, fusion reactor in the sky. It's just like, hey, plug in. It's right there. It's pretty much unlimited.
Yeah, it's Anais Nin, right, that said, we don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are. So the people who are powerless, who don't want to be left behind, who feel like their entire world is constructed by powers beyond them, building artifacts that do things they don't understand, and that then those powers that be that float above somehow the earthly plane that the rest of us have to live in, they have the yachts and they have the fancy parties and they appear in the Epstein files and they do all these kinds of things.
Right.
And it just sort of over and over now, it is reinforced to people that that America has a hidden caste system, and that the story of the American dream was maybe just a fiction to keep you in your place or a cope. And so if you want to look for ways that the brokenness of the system was explicitly engineered by somebody, the Clintons or the Rothschilds or the God knows who, right? Like there's the engineering to keep you down. I think the way we look for narrative, the way we look for characters, there's got to be a bad guy. Is it Darth Sidious that's doing it? Is it Darth Vader that's oppressing me?
Right.
Is it Hillary Clinton? Is it Donald Trump? Somebody's oppressing me.
Another theory is it's UAPs, right?
Or is it UAPs and UFOs and it's all lizard people? Let's go shoot up a pizza joint, right? Because the lizard people are, doing stuff to kids. There's all sorts of stupid stuff because we're stuck. Again, we see the world as we are. And if we grow up only knowing how to tell simple stories where there's a bad guy that hurts the tribe, and then we are part of the tribe, and we're going to find traitors in the tribe to kick them out, right? And then we're going to do a cleansing of the tribe. If you have a tribal narrative loop and that's the only program you know how to run, guess what you're going to look for? All inputs are going to plug into a few of those things. You're going to have a very happy little narrative that you run on that has no correspondence to reality, but you're going to be able to get by with it, and it makes you feel like you have a handle on the world. And this is going to be a branch point, but we're not going to take it. But this could be a branch point talking about human sentience, consciousness, and how foreign a real AI could be, right? But for now, let's stick with why things are broken.
Yeah, I do want to go there.
We'll go there. Control Z. We'll set jump. We'll long jump back there, right? So in the case of the people looking for tribal stories, looking for simple stories of oppression, you will find plenty in the world to plug into that story. But if you're looking for if you're going to have an openness to it and say, well, what's really happening here? The billionaires can't even control what's going on. The billionaires get stuff happening to them, right? So what is it? Well, the big, thriving, teeming mass of humanity has way more going on. The billionaires who go in the yachts and they hang out in the harbor at St. Bart's, whatever, you know what? They're terrified that their multi-generational dynastic wealth is going to get completely taken apart by all these upstart, but whether it's upstart tech bros, over here in the US, or whether it's oligarchs messing with them, from China or Russia or whatever, there's a lot of dynamics at the, 3 comma level and above that are not great for those people either.
Right.
So what is in the midst of this whole thing that we've got on this little blue ball that gets just a little sliver of energy, very, very tiny, like the angular occlusion that we have, we get a very small allocation of the sun's energy. But with that energy, what are we doing with it, right? And that sort of, that question, that question, I think, if you look at it from the outside, you say, well, maybe these stories of oppression aren't really what's going on. Maybe the way we actually fix it is we have we start developing and we start encouraging people to look for better stories and better mythologies that both ground them in a sense of place, of what is your place here on earth at this moment in time, but also can route to existential hope. And I think that's more important than ever, which is why I'm so glad you're doing this podcast and so glad that that you said this is your life's calling, and it's great that you have this calling because these stories have to be told. People need to see that, the successful entrepreneur, millionaire people, whatever, they're not Hunger Games style sitting up here and playing with the lives of the proletariat, right? That there's a tremendous amount, I came from a very middle class upbringing. I went through the public school system.
Likewise,
and I'm doing whatever I can to try to put this positive energy back in the world. I spend my nights and weekends thinking really hard about what are the true lessons from the open source community that we can then use to build an abundant baseline for AI, right? So one of the new things that I'm launching is a thing called AI Commons. And reinvigorating some of the ideas behind the sharing and share alike kind of licenses around data that will allow us to basically make it so as people and public resources are put into building data sets that let us build better AIs, that those are locked open for other people to innovate on, to build on, and to benefit from, right? These are the kinds of things that, that take real work. But if we do that work and those items start showing up, then we're plumbing our way into a better future. Right. So it's a lot of, sorry, that was a bit of a rambling response.
I love that because one of the things I was going to bring up with you really being deeply rooted and successful in open source is, when you think about, I talked about the Stargate moment.
Yep.
And it was actually the day before that DeepSeek R1 was announced. Right. Did you know that?
Yeah.
It was the day before.
The timing was kind of interesting, right?
It's amazing, right? Talk about a synchronicity. And then nobody knew how powerful that was when it was first launched. I mean, I'm sure a handful of people did, but it took about a week, and then a week later, that's when NVIDIA lost $600 billion in market cap, and the Nasdaq lost a trillion.
Everyone
right.
got hit.
But oh my gosh, I was so excited about that announcement, and the reason why is that you and I have been technologists for a long time. I've been programming since I was 7. I know you started really young, and have been an entrepreneur for a long time. And I remember when Neil Stephenson came out with the book in the beginning, was the command line. Oh my gosh, great book, right? And he predicted accurately that Linux would win over Windows to power the internet, right? That open source would win. And he really laid out his vision for why. It's only nonfiction book he ever wrote that I know of. I don't think he wrote another one, but he's one of my favorite authors, like The Diamond Age, Snow Crash, amazing books, and some of his other books. But how do you think about that as a vector? I mean, I actually think it's pretty obvious at this point that open source is going to win.
Yeah,
the DeepSeek moment was so huge because it was so early in. This is a year ago, okay? So ChatGPT is like barely over 2 years old at that point. And R1, DeepSeek R1, was vastly more powerful than GPT-4, which led to the moratorium call we talked about, right? The pause 4 months after the launch of ChatGPT. So I think that's great for humanity that open source will win this moment. I also think it means that once we get to AGI and then artificial superintelligence, it's going to be very distributed as opposed to this kind of oligarch, type approach that, Max Tegmark laid out. Although the megas like really mean well, and the whole point and the end of that story is like, how would you write the rest of the story? And he's really getting you to think about humanity's big moment, and where we go from here. But I think it's a fantastic occurrence that open source is this powerful and able to catch up that quickly, versus the kind of the frontier model is just going to rule everything.
Yeah, I think for people who are not very steeped maybe in some of the AI technology, it may just look like Clash of the Titans, and we're mere mortals down here, and here's like, Godzilla versus like whatever. Right. And it's actually not that. When you look at it, it's people. Some people are very, very smart, right? If somebody's got 10, 20 IQ points on the average person, okay, that's a lot, right? But it's still just one person, and they've got to sleep. And they have to spend some time eating, and they have to spend some time not plugged in and working. Right. So when you look at small teams and you look past the veil of like this name, the company brand name, and the billions of dollars they've raised, and then you go all the way down the bottom, the story that I think the public doesn't understand, and I'm sure this has been your experience as well with your companies, at the end of the day, core products that drive tons of revenue are really the work of a small handful of people at the core of it. I remember hearing a story years ago that the core database kernel engine team at Oracle was maybe a dozen people, right? The Windows NT kernel team, again, not very big. Macintosh, the operating system, written by a small team of people, right? This is back to my point about the Louis XIV and the scythe in Paris. The dramatically productivity amplifying power of software is the story that no one has seemed to have told. YouTube was 4 people. Dropbox, GitHub, 2 people, right? Dropbox, I think, a couple people. These things now, over time, you had to have a lot more people building additional pieces onto it. But the start of the idea and the execution of it and building these things, it doesn't take that many people to get started with it. So if you look at the way this touches on the DeepSeek thing is that you don't need to go and fund another OpenAI to compete with OpenAI, right? You just need a few people who kind of know what they're doing.
Right.
And I know some of the engineers at these different companies, and I know the people, who've done some of the projects. The thing that, made GPT into ChatGPT was a project in a data set called InstructGPT, right? And they tuned it into being a chatbot. That's a small team, there's a guy who led it. And like these kinds of things happen not the scale of hundreds of billions of dollars. It's like these things happen because a small group of people decide to do something.
Right.
So lots of people in the world could go and do things, right? If they feel safe, if they have food, if they have some economic viability in their lives, they can create lots of interesting things. That's really the formula for abundance, is looking past the big, giant, very intimidating, billion-dollar raises and all that, and getting down to who's really doing what and what's really needed.
Right.
So you have a few people, you have a giant trove of data that's been crawled from the internet, or that like was compiled from a lot of books and things like that are mostly in the public domain, or a lot of them are copyrighted. That data doesn't belong exclusively to these companies. The GPUs, well, everyone got their GPUs from Jensen, right?
Right.
Or Google's TPUs are pretty good too. Like there's a bunch of stuff happening here where, the hardware is also not really, there's not an exclusive lock on that either. China's trying its damnedest to build competing ones.
Inevitably,
everyone's trying to build these things. I mean, everyone's trying to build them. At the end of the day, now that we know what these things do and what's needed, these matrix multiplies, they're not that hard to do on a chip. They're actually easier on a chip to scale this out. It's mostly memory bandwidth and connectivity, right? So like, if you put all that together and you're like, well, what is the moat here that would defend these hundreds of billions of dollars, compounding into trillions of dollars of return for the investors? And people are still searching around for this.
Right.
So I think that, if we go back to the question of what is needed for people to be abundant, these smaller models and chaining up smaller models, having novel data coming in, right? Data quality is still a massive, massive differentiator. So if you're in Chad and you want to solve the economic problems, or you want to solve the agricultural problems in Chad, you're much better flying drones over that specific area of Chad, tuning the model to understand exactly the water table there, doing so on and so forth. Like those data sets feeding into the drones and robots and all these other things, that's going to be way more valuable than flying all that data, or sending all that data back to somewhere in Mountain View or Silicon Valley, and having them send you a model back and charge you, by the token.
Right.
So I think this idea of embedded intelligence, using open source to empower lots of people to build cybernetic systems that are grounded and embodied in situ in the areas of application, that's really the next frontier.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, robotics will just be the physical manifestation of AI. So I think you and I agree that open source is going to win long term, right? And long term, what is long term to you? I mean, we're in the exponential curve. So I mean, the timeline I've laid out since the beginning of this podcast is that we have the next 10 to 15 years, I think, to make that fateful choice of, are we going to choose abundance for everyone on the planet, or are we going to cling on to the power and scarcity mindset of the zero-sum game that I just don't think, I believe that technology throughout history has been a great forcing function for us to make fateful choices.
Yes.
You think about this is a horrible thing to talk about, but it was a real thing. We had slavery in this country, and that bootstrapped, farming in terms of capitalism, which most of the country were farmers at the beginning. And then the Industrial Revolution came along, machine automation, et cetera. And we should have never treated people like that, and it's horrible to even think that we did. But that made, that technological shift made that way of operating completely obsolete.
Right.
And, really seen for what it was as well. And now we're in this exponential curve. So I really think that I'll lay out the way I think it's going to happen.
Sure.
I mean, I'm writing a whole book about this, but the way, the shortest, succinct way I can describe it is that we're going to have this exponential curve play out to the point where I think it's going to be obvious to both leaders around the world as well as to the large populace that we're we're going to be able to seize abundance for everybody on the planet. And I'm not sure like how much people are going to try to cling on to the power, and whether or not it's going to be, a lot of my less optimistic friends think that there has to be some kind of horrible, violent conflict. I'm a Jewish guy, like there was the Holocaust, like they're like, well, humanity's had these things. And I always say, just because we've had these horrible things does not mean we're doomed to repeat the past. Like, go back to slavery or go back to the Holocaust or all of these things. And so I think that it's going to be obvious that we're looking at the end of disease. We're looking at, desalinization all over the planet because we've solved energy, the scarcity of water problem goes away. We're looking at abundance, of food and materials that we cannot imagine today. And you kind of went there earlier, but have you ever read Enlightenment Now by Steven Pinker?
No, I've not.
Fantastic book. Very data driven. You would love it. Just the chapter on inequality alone is worth the price of the book. But he just looks at the data over long periods of time, and you start out saying we're living in abundance now, and that's for sure true. If we're in 2026, if we went back to 1926, if we went back to 1826, I mean, people then compared to now would be like, oh my gosh, you guys have grocery stores where you can get all these different blueberries and,
Brett, actually, we don't have to go to 1926.
Yeah.
So I came here in 1985 as an immigrant from China. At that time, I was in a big city, Wuhan, actually, which many people have heard of now. It was a pretty big city. It's a big steel town in China. It's a, kind of an industrialized city, several million people. So it wasn't like I was in Podunk, like backwoods, like I was in a big city. And we did not have indoor air conditioning. We did not have indoor heating. We did not have running potable water. We would go and get our weekly deliveries of coal, pressed coal from the wheelbarrow that would go down kind of the street, and we'd like get coal, stash it underneath our stove. We'd boil the water before we drink it.
All right. By the way, this is the situation in Chad today.
So I know I can cut. I know I can make it in that situation. And we had ration tickets for meat and for certain other kinds of things. So coming to America and walking into a Kroger for the first time was like, you can just buy as much fried chicken. First of all, fried chicken, but also ice cream exists, and you can buy as much of it as you want. And there's just stacks of fresh apples and fruit that look incredible. That was a Dorothy, kind of going inside the color.
Here in the Wizard of Oz.
Just like, holy crap, and that, so the folks who are born in America who don't live in, let's say, horrid circumstances, but live in moderate circumstances in America, I think their baseline of just not how bad it could be, because it's a terrible way to think, but just like how much there already is in their lives. I think that calibration, I'm actually grateful that I got to, see that as an immigrant and have that experience. But we absolutely can. We have to change people's mentalities around what the stories could be. That's why it's important to tell these stories, to write the science fiction. That's positive, right? I do think that the way we'll get there is not through violent revolution. And the reason is because we are already so good. It's a dark reason. And the dark reason is we're so good at sedating the masses that the people in charge and the billionaires will absolutely find ways to essentially ameliorate any of this kind of energy. And again, this is a horrible and dark picture to paint, but I think as a pragmatic engineering kind of minded person, I would say, well, if this is the problem and these people have this route to solution, they will almost certainly hit that solution every time, right? You will give people the most amazing new kinds of engineered drugs. You will legalize marijuana everywhere. You will have all sorts of art and music. You'll have digital soma is what I've been calling it, right? That will just keep people, it's dark and horrible and a waste of humanity, but it will at least keep people from rising up. One of the thing that you say about technology always forcing a change for us, the broad dissemination of pornography actually has had a massive change on culture, and the cheap sex bots are going to arrive any day now from Shenzhen. Those are going to change culture, and so you have a situation where the traditional things that would motivate a lot of young, angry, men without hope and future to go and revolt and decapitate a king, we can actually have the technology to short a lot of that to ground. Now, is that a good thing to do? No. But is that a way to manage this transition if it really gets to that point? Probably. So I think that that's where, we are headed into, that's my version of dystopia, is essentially Brave New World style, where people are managed out of having meaningful lives, and they're hooked on digital soma, and they're basically just given all these things, and they're painted a picture of having a good life that is actually not the best life they could be having. We're not actually maximizing or putting in the substrate for them to maximize their potential.
Right.
We're just going to box them into a pen and feed them like little clockwork oranges. That is absolutely, I feel that is like almost certainly some of the things that will happen on our way to trying to create abundant infrastructure. Because I just don't see the current people who have power and have money, I just don't see them abdicating that. And if they try to do, well, anyway, I'll stop there. But anyway, that's kind of the.
But do you think that? That's a pretty dark future. I understand what you're saying, but do you actually think that the billionaires of the world would actually want that future? I mean, it seems like that. Like that type of future is one where, as you walk around and you're interacting in society, would seem like we've lost our way.
But we're already there.
Yeah.
We're already there. How many young men and women? I mean, let's look at the hard, cold reality, right? And that three different people. We'll look at, the young man that's, maybe not an incel, but is certainly spending a lot more time than they'll admit, watching, porn or porn-like things, than the young women who are like, well, all the men are creeps, and it's rough it's always been rough being a woman. It's particularly rough being young women in today's society. But all the men are creeps, and so many girls are out there making money, basically making amateur porn, that they make hundreds of thousands of dollars a month on the stuff, right? So why wouldn't I try my hand at that? And then you got billionaires who profit from sports gambling, online gambling, who make tons of money off of these kinds of platforms, who make tons of money off of vending useless crap to people and driving up more demand for it, so that's as if meaning is produced in these kinds of trivialities and trading these kinds of digital commodities. So you asked, are the billionaires going to be okay with it? I think they're already okay with it. I don't see anyone. I mean, some of them for religious reasons are like, no, we've got to, the pornography stuff is bad. We have to, put energy behind promoting traditional values and things like this, and people forming families. That's all good energy there. But a lot of that's deeply religion coded, which then puts off a lot of other people. And that versus raw human nature and dollars is having an uphill battle, right? So I think that the evidence, I don't want it to be this way. I'm not celebrating it.
No, I understand.
As an engineer, as a physicist, I start from first principles, and I have to look at the data. And the data shows that an economy based on people trafficking and creating boundless desire that can be sufficed with simulacrum of things that provide meaning, that seems to be going very strong. And I don't see any signs of it tapering off with AI.
But isn't that do you know that movie Idiocracy?
Of course.
Yeah. Do you think? It sounds like the Idiocracy future in some ways. I mean, it's
it's
like what about all the people that are going to be able to manifest the use of AI to create companies? I mean, part of the reason I thought the moratorium, kind of the pause call was so ridiculous is it was like, look, this is going to lead to millions and millions of new startups. They'll each individually be smaller, kind of like you were talking about earlier, small teams. Well, that's even more true in the AI moment, that they can do a lot more. I had Jeremiah Wang on the podcast, who has the Blitzscaling Fund alongside Reid Hoffman. That was episode 21. He's a good friend. He was the closing keynote at TED AI this year. And he showed data at TED AI that the AI native startup, the ones that are started in this era, their average revenue per employee is somewhere between $2.2 to $2.4 million per employee, whereas regular SaaS is like $250,000 or so, and top tier SaaS prior to this AI moment is around $450,000.
Right.
I'm largely correct with those numbers. That episode fact checked me on it, but basically, we're in this moment where the ability to shatter the barrier to creativity has never been more present as in right now, which is different than the sedation of like, I'm just going to, you know, kind of have the Wall-E type future or the Idiocracy type future.
I think the Wall-E thing is great.
It's a great movie.
Yeah, Idiocracy. I mean, it was also kind of a fun movie, but it was sort of like punching down and kind of like shooting a straw man.
It was definitely punching down.
Right, it was definitely punching down, but I think Wall-E was deeply. It was a very deep commentary, right? Because if you think about all the humans who were, you know, on the spaceship, you know, the by and large, right, which is like such a great brand, and then you know you have the advertisements like, oh, the blue suits are in vogue now, so you're sitting there sipping your like 64-ounce supersized soda, you hit the blue button, and then now you're cool because you're blue, you know, like actually a lot of people live that way right now, and to some form or another are reduced to that kind of an existence, and that reduction of the raw spirit of humanity that glows in each person, that reduction is itself, I think, an immoral thing. So if you look at this thing of like this question of you know, AI and creating all these startups and all this stuff, I mean, I don't disagree with that. I think that it does lead to more creativity and people can do a lot more with less. But I think that sort of that doesn't answer the question of the telos, right? That's sort of like at this level that if you believe as an entrepreneur that, you know, people going and taking whatever tools are available and using, you know, fast capital formation to go and tackle an interesting problem, great. I mean, how can I disagree with that? That's great. There's lots of problems to be solved in this world, right?
Not just this world, but I think
for the world to come.
Yeah, for the world to come. Like I think, you know, can we conquer faster light speed travel, et cetera? We don't really know.
No, we have to be applying. Obviously, accelerating human intelligence and pulling it directly into the fusion reactor of the sun is a good thing.
Absolutely.
Like it can lead to a lot of great things. How we do it, that's the art, and that's the context of this entire conversation, right? So when you look at the people who are building these kinds of startups and doing all this, like, what problems are they really trying to tackle, right? Are they actually trying to unwind the kind of hedonic, consumption-oriented, massive industrial scale capitalism kinds of, you know, consumer economy things, or are they just turning that to 11, right? There's a lot of these critiques of, and I'm not a critic of capitalism per se. I just don't think it's a telos unto itself. I think, you know, some of the things that we use in capital formation, the idea of investors getting some of the surplus, you know, I believe in employee ownership. I think, you know, employees and founders should have a significant portion of the upside as well. And when we do these things kind of in a limited way or in the small, it basically kind of works. Markets at large are good at solving certain kinds of allocation problems. When we scale them up to a size where they're kind of runaway money on money returns and there's no externalities priced in, and now you're buying politicians to ensure the game goes to another round, I think that's going to run a terrible course, right? We're seeing the end result of that going for a few decades now, and it's not good. But it doesn't make me some like commie socialist, right? I'm just sort of looking at the obvious thing, saying markets don't work if you don't price in the externalities, right? So or markets not a net good, right? They'll solve for something, but they'll basically screw a lot of people. And that's not what any economist who supports markets really wants or says they want. So I think at the end of the day, we look at all these things and say, well, what are we really trying to do here, right? What is the real issue? If we could empower everyone, you know, hearkening back to Neil Stephenson in the Diamond Age, if we give everyone their own illustrated primer, and that is their guide to life. And as smart as the, you know, Star Trek Next Generation Enterprise computer, it can tell them if you're in Chad, here's how you build a well, here's how you like do desalinization. You only need these commodities to then build a really nice thing that you have ample fresh water. What are all the things that we can do if we have this kind of technology? Is that enough? Or we still regress to our Neanderthal ways, or not Neanderthal, but to our, you know, tribal ways? Are we still always going to be looking at, well, that guy's got a bigger house and that guy's got a, you know, hotter wife, and that guy, you know, like, are we still going to be in this kind of a mode? And I think the answer, based on 48 years of observing humans, my answer is that unless we solve the issue of culture and spirituality and sort of a mythos for each person to have a dignified and meaningful life, if we don't plumb people into that and orient them towards that kind of a North Star, we can do all the abundance creation we want, and we'll still end up with the dumbest wars for the dumbest reasons, right? And it comes back then, and in a personal journey I've been on since 2016, is really trying to recover and understand the origins of this word technology and how we think about techne separate from, you know, the user. I think even in that split, that initial dichotomy, maybe is where some of this it's kind of an original sin to some extent of how we approach this whole thing. Just as you wouldn't give a 5-year-old a Lamborghini to go crash into a fence post.
Right.
When we give people computers, and we did this in the 90s, we saw, people dialing up and connecting, and it was great, and we want to make things easier to use for people. But then people got phished and spammed to hell, right? And even to this day, you have people who are losing money all the time because they don't know the difference between the address bar and a pop-up and a whatever and spam and phishing. Like, it doesn't make sense to them. They never learned it. So we deployed all this technology. We put all this money into making things easier to use for users. But at the end of the day, we are still strapping in a Homo sapiens from 300,000 years ago into the seat of this incredible thing. And is that really sustainable? Is that really the path forward? Or do we say, you know what, actually, the society we've built, the technical infrastructure we've got, and the amount of power we want to give to each person is so great that they actually have to go through 30, 35 years of personal and social and cultural intellectual development before they graduate into a level where they can be given, essentially, a super brain that can tell them how to make any kind of Grey Goo they want. Right. These are the kinds of conversations that are hard to do in the West because there's such a deep-rooted DNA in the West about individual ennoblement and individual, I am the sovereign individual, and of course I'm awesome. And how dare you tell me I can't have access to that machine over there until I go through 20 years of this kind of development? That is just antithetical to how we view things in the West, and so we don't even consider that possibility space. But I think we may very well end up in that kind of a mode.
So I'm glad that you went into spirituality, because I actually think that that's part of the reason why my curiosity and drive to read over 55 books last year took me there, to really understand, to the greatest extent I could, which there's no way to completely understand it, what is this reality we're living in? And I agree with you that if we continue to go down the path of, algorithmically manipulating people through social media, pushing constant dystopia to them, through the regular media, through all of the additives to our food that are like sedatives in a way, right? They're poisons. And then the pharmaceutical complex then saying, well, I've got the answer for you. Here's GLP-1s, and just this kind, which is like an unprecedented, takeoff in terms of revenue. That we have to break that paradigm in the world. As you look at the different models of governance in the world, and then I'd love to go into spirituality. How do you see that playing out? What's the blending that breaks that paradigm and gets humanity to collectively wake up, so we don't just go into this sedative, kind of Wall-E future, and we go into this future that's much more Star Trek-like, that's much more this technological takeoff that allows us to, explore other worlds, and you and I can hop in, let's go see a quasar, and all of these amazing... You
don't want to get too close to a quasar.
Yeah, that's true. But no, or a black hole.
Right.
But it would be cool to get close enough to try to see what's going on as it bends light and everything else. So I'm just kind of curious, how you think humanity will break that paradigm, because I think it's a must. I mean, if all of humanity, let's just say practically that all of humanity is going to have access to artificial superintelligence, if they want it. And then we're living in this sedative type state. Doesn't that make us prone to all types of horrible outcomes, in terms of just getting even more and more sedative and more Wall-E, and
I think to have this conversation in the fullness of how we could have it, we should start with painting maybe a picture, my sci-fi picture, of what it could be like.
Okay. Perfect.
And I think these require...
Hopefully you'll write a sci-fi novella after this.
I've got 2 or 3 queued up.
Good.
I just don't... I mean, no one's ever got the time, but I would love to. But I think actually that you and I think this is quite realistic. I really think that we are, assuming, barring any unfortunate accidents or anything else, I think we could very much enter into the zone of where really, really great, cryogenics or whatever could actually preserve us as we sort of begin entering a senescent time in our lives, okay? So I think in the next 20 years, especially with AI augmented research and whatnot, we could probably get to a point where we could, just for lack of a better term, freeze our brains or freeze ourselves to where we could be revived in 50 years or 100 years when the brain scanning technology or brain-computer interfaces are good enough. So we wake up and then we get plugged in and then we expand our minds into an augmented mind that then allow us to essentially leave or transcend from our biological form into something that can then recondense into you can imagine like 50 years. Well, if I get frozen at age 70, then 70 years before they wake me up, they just build a clone of me, right? That from a body standpoint, and then implant me into that when they wake me up. There's all sorts of things that you can sort of sketch on the back of a napkin and say, maybe that could work. And if it doesn't work 100 years from now, 500 years from now, maybe it works, right? Whatever it is. So I think if we can enter into the zone where we can actually get frozen, we can almost certainly get to a point where then we will have the ability to do some kind of neural transfer, either into another human, host form, or into some kind of non-human or hybrid biological solid state computing device, right? And at that point, then all the science fiction novels are true, right? At that point, you could be whatever. I could be a spaceship. I could just basically live on a cadence of every second is basically an Earth year. And, I'm not just a spaceship, but I'm like a series of spaceship. I'm a hive mind, and we spread our eyeballs around the galaxy, and I have like parallax vision across this entire corner of the galaxy. We can go and just zoom around and do various things. We can all get together and say, let's really hunker down because Andromeda is a long way away. Let's get over there and see what we can find over there, right? Yeah. There's all sorts of stuff we can start writing fabulous science fiction novels about, right?
Yeah. But it's not a long way away if we conquer faster than light speed trouble.
or we don't. But actually, I have a whole nother series of things I can do around that. But we're going to get sidetracked if we go that way.
All right.
But my point is that with the energies that we get, with the energy that we unlock more energy from the sun and so on and so forth, we may not need to travel in physical form. That actually, it is really about using energy itself and propagating that.
Consciousness,
And so, in fact, the universe may be thriving and throbbing with this stuff, but we're these slow, low energy, you think about how cold this is here on Earth. The hottest furnace on Earth is freezing cold compared to the surface of the sun.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And the surface of the sun isn't even that hot compared to how hot it gets elsewhere. So we're really in a cold, dark corner. We're basically a mold growing on a cold rock in the corner of the fridge. So we're just trying to figure out right now, how do we get out of this biological little gravity well? So I think, long story short, what does that have to do with AI? Well, if we can accelerate science, and if we can actually get to a point where our minds can have that kind of a future, then there's nothing to say that we can't blend our minds together. There's nothing to say that we can't form a thriving sort of hive mind kind of a thing. There's nothing to say that actually at that point there is such thing as a separate human mind. And, if you make this then extremely concrete, the language is a technology. And what language allowed us to do is to be in conversation with thousands of years of human minds. You spoke to the authors of the Bhagavad Gita. That's a hell of a thing, man. They don't even speak English, and you certainly don't speak their language. But you could, through a lot of processing, at this point in time, you can actually access their perspectives.
Oh, yeah.
China is interesting because Chinese language, even though the pronunciation has evolved a lot, the written language has actually stayed quite similar for a long time. So a school child in China today can read the first Qing emperor's epitaph that he had written on the side of a mountain. They can read it natively as if you were reading a menu at a restaurant. In English, we can't quite do that because English is a relatively new language. And there's
but
French
AI,
and all these other things.
I mean, it's the Babelfish moment.
It is the Babelfish moment, right? So I think the point is that all of our conception of ourselves, the individuation that we just grow up with intrinsically, that all has the opportunity to dissolve. And the question of, do we want it to dissolve, is the important question. Right? To what extent is it valuable that we are these individuated phenotypes carving our way through the possibility space, that we have this limitation of memory, so we have a compaction process, that we are not constantly swimming the full context of the entire Library of Congress worth of knowledge, right? What are these things that actually make it valuable for us to have our individual lives and that would play off of each other in a separate way? And when is it better to have this blended thing, and when is it useful? Better is the loaded term. When is it useful to have this large thing? There's a beautiful, very accessible rendering of some of these Buddhist concepts in the last season of The White Lotus, right? When It's described.
That's a tough season.
Tough season. Yeah, it wasn't my favorite.
With his family?
Yeah, it wasn't my favorite, but I will say that the whole story of you're a drop of water and then you come back into the ocean, right? Yeah. And the great irony of human existence is that all of the I-ness of I is in the separation of I from everyone else.
Yep.
But in every aspect of life, the fear we feel, the shame we feel, all these things are, and the pain, the anger, all these things are rooted in disconnection.
Right, that's right. The illusion of separation.
The illusion of separation is the very thing that allows us to be separate or to see ourselves as separate. That is the thing that same dynamic also then creates the possibility of the source of a lot of our pain and discomfort and fear. Yeah. So if we can get people to transcend from that, to access a deeper level of perception, whether it's through, psychedelics or whether it's through, harmony and singing. Yeah. There's a lot of the rituals we've had throughout the spiritual history of humanity. A lot of the rituals we have are to connect us, despite our separateness. For sure. Right? And that's the breaking of bread at family dinner. That's mass. That's singing. Again, I love seeing gospel choirs singing everything. Just the energy that you get from that. Yeah. I've been in churches and great cathedrals when they're singing, and it's just incredible the feeling that you have. Oh, yeah. We go to festivals. Young people recover this. You don't have to tell a human to want to go and dance with music and to enjoy and have a good time when they're with their friends. We don't have to program them. Like, they want to do that anyway. Right. So I think the narrative that we have around what our problems are needs to be kind of elevated to this level of discourse. Yeah. And then we can actually approach some solutions, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's actually why I think this time that we're in is coinciding with the consciousness awakening, this curiosity about what is consciousness, and the fact that last year, Dan Brown came out with The Secret of Secrets, which is all about non-local consciousness and how our brain receives consciousness like an antenna. You have Annika Harris, who is married to Sam Harris, who came out with Lights On, where she concludes that book by saying consciousness is fundamental, meaning it's fundamental property of the universe. You have the telepathy tapes. I'm not sure if you've listened to those, but season 1 and season 2 I've promoted a lot through this podcast are really, really good.
Wait, telepathy tapes, is that the nonverbal?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
It's nonverbal children. Right. In season 1 who develop an ability to communicate with their caretaker telepathically, and there's a lot of evidence of precognition. I covered that on episode 40 with Paige Britt. But lots and lots of books on that. There's a lot of evidence for, Dean Radin has written a number of books on experiments that show that we do have some minor telepathic abilities. These children just have it in this next level way, and they've been studied. And the most beautiful part of season 1 of the telepathy tapes is the last episode, where it's like, well, what did the children have to say to us? What is their wish for humanity? And it's all about love. It's like Beatles, love is all you need. And season 2 goes into the evidence of plant-based consciousness, which we're learning more and more about how trees communicate through the mycelium network. It goes into animal-based consciousness and all of these other elements of consciousness. So I think that, one of the things I explore in the lattice is the ancient mystics were right, that we all are all connected. And we're finding out through quantum physics that we are all connected. Higgs boson, that there's a field. I would say that field is where the evidence, somewhere in there, it's probably quantum, of where consciousness lies. And, we only know what 4% of the universe is made of. We call that matter. We don't even know what 96% is. Of this reality, we call it dark energy and dark matter. We have no clue what it is. We have theories, but no proof, And there's never been a reconciliation between quantum science and classical science, right? We were talking earlier, before we went on the air, about how Max Planck became more spiritual as a result of his discoveries in quantum physics, and Albert Einstein. And so So I'm just kind of curious, like spiritually, because we've danced around this a bit. Like, what do you think this reality is that we're living in, and how does it play into this moment? Like, what is our actual spiritual reality?
Yeah, I think there's a. So for me, I'm always trying to keep the rationalist and skeptic sort of approach pretty close at hand, and I also, having studied physics. I know how much you can get lost in translation between the math and then the sort of the layperson rendering of some of that. And then I also have, I guess what one would call sort of what's the term? Like, I'm not a dualist, right? So I think very much there's some kind of hard reality, and we're in it and we're of it. So I'm very, very big on emergence and transcendence kind of things. And complexity and emergent phenomena, all that stuff. But I am always very, very careful about making a leap that, where we do a little hand waving, because you don't have to do a lot of hand waving, and then you can end up in a place that you've sort of crossed over into dualism a little bit, of like there is just some, spiritual energy field and all these things. And I think there are certainly energy fields, and I think that there's lots of things that can happen when different kinds of fields can interact. But I think when people go to that step, that they don't necessarily see the line they've crossed as much as when I'm, for me at least personally, what I'm trying to hold is how far can we get as a hard-nosed, scientific, rationalist, skeptical, mathematical physicist kind of person. Yeah. And I'm not a mathematical physicist, but someone who can at least hang with some of the math. So that's kind of, for me, I'm like very much trying to be on the ground level of looking at that.
Right.
And I do think there are places, well, when you're on the ground level, the good news is it's not just a hard rejection of all these things. By no means is it that. There's actually really interesting things that show up and that make you scratch your head. So that's for me like the kind of the intellectual loop that I'm running when I'm trying to explore these kinds of things.
Understood. And I love science. I mean, just to be clear. I
get that. Yeah. And
like in the lattice, I show that the scientific proof of our spirituality happens, and that is the great uniter, right?
Yeah. I think
it would unite us. I think.
I think the question, consciousness comes up a lot now, especially as we're seeing the quality of the LLM agents. The not just the quality, but they're able to do things from like this LLM algorithm, like the Transformers algorithm and whatnot. Even with all the variants that have happened since, 2018 when the paper first dropped, they're still kind of basically the same thing. They're manipulating vector representations of a bunch of encoded sort of human language, right? Which itself is 10,000 years of us, writing about things and thinking about things. And through this mechanical mathematical operation and looping it, we're able to get new interesting things popping out that until 5-10 years ago, we certainly did not think could happen as a mechanical process. So that's very interesting.
It is. Yeah.
And I think the consciousness question that has been sitting as the elephant in the room, so to speak, that we don't have a good way of resolving qualia, right? We've never really resolved this sense of being awake and being aware, and there's lots of really great folks who've written about this, and there's many experiments that have been done around this in brain science and cognitive science that are really interesting. But at the end of the day, I think the materialist in me has to acknowledge that the qualia, the I-ness of me right now, that sense of self, that sense of experiencing and thinking, all of that is a naturalistic process that's running within, this kind of biological mass. And that if I pass out, if I go to sleep, that process, the process of qualia and the sort of the representational stage, I think is the term that's used sometimes in consciousness studies. That stage, the lights are off, there's nothing on the stage. And then when my subconscious decides it wants to, interact in the world and whatnot, it boots that stage up. When people who sleepwalk, that stage doesn't get booted up. You're still out and interacting in the world. You can stumble down steps. You can run into real trouble. But that stage isn't booted up.
Right.
So we know for a fact that the biological mechanistic processes that lead to consciousness are sort of an optional aspect of most of our brains and our body. So if that's the case, and we also know, looking across the animal kingdom, there are many other renderings of
course, yeah.
intelligence.
Yeah.
And in a, I don't need octopus, for instance, because I think octopi would be like
octopi are
the
really
closest, the closest to alien intelligence that
They
we
are
have,
like aliens,
right?
yeah.
They are like aliens because their neural structure is embedded across the entire, throughout their entire bodies. Maybe that's why it's so delicious. But in any case, in the case of all these other animals, and you see very like small brains in corvids, and they're able to do tool use, right? Elephants, they have burial rituals and death rituals. There's certainly, unquestionably, qualia in lots of other creatures in the animal kingdom.
Yeah.
So this human exceptionalism thing, I don't buy at all.
Right. We didn't know that, by the way, until recently. Like Byron Reese pointed out that even on human babies, we didn't sedate them for operations until several decades ago. That's like crazy.
Mind-boggling. So the point is, I guess, there's a long-winded way of building up to your answer, or to your question about the spirituality aspect. I think that for us, our intrinsic sort of drive for spirituality, the sense of awe that we feel, and the wondering, and what is this and all that, I think that urge and that feeling can be generalized into something which is sort of the generalization of love in a higher dimension, right? In a higher set of dimensions. When we reach to build, when we seek to understand, when we reach upwards, there's a thing there that doesn't have to be there. It's a thing there, and it's a thing that we have an embodied choice to make. We choose to lean into that. In doing that, we are manifesting the intrinsic residual energy and openness to love and receptiveness in every tissue, every bone in our body, every fiber of our being.
Right.
That there is some kind of aggregation, a summation effect. And I think, for me, something I've always done since I was a kid, and I don't know if it's something, it's maybe not that common for others to do it, but I've always thought about, ever since I learned about cells and the basics of the body that you learn in elementary school, I've always thought about, what is it like to be a cell in my own body? What is it like to be a muscle cell? Am I bored? Because all I do is like contract and then relax, and then contract and relax. Or if I'm a brain cell, I just sit there kind of like, just like zapping other brain cells all the time. Or is it like getting zapped and then zapping other brain cells?
And how amazing is it that you have trillions of cells, and yet there's a sense of you? There's
a sense of me that comes of that, right? And I think people, if you think about it though, there's this, like if I'm a cell in the body, now, granted, I do not believe, I'm not sort of this panpsychic sort of person that thinks like, oh, every cell is conscious. Like, no. But in the cell, there are degrees of freedom. And there is a sort of a set of actions it can take. And as the cell, sort of like, I don't know what it's like to be a cell, but if the body is operating normally, when the cell feels like it wants to contract, it can do so, and there's ample sugars available. Its mitochondria are all happy and pumping out all this, energy. And then when it sort of builds up too much lactic acid, and then it sort of relaxes, all that acid gets cleared away. And so when the cell in a normal human body, when you're in good shape, your cells as they're operating, there's a flow state, and sort of serendipitously things they need show up, and the waste they produce get cleared out. And it's just a very happy little community of cells. Like, oh, this thing is attacking me. Oh, wait, there's a macrophage coming to eat it. Thank goodness, right? Like, you can imagine, and this is just such a hilariously, like, cheesy just so story, but it is, you can imagine that your body as a community, as a cellular community, when things are vibing, that's when you're happy and healthy as well. And if you're sick, things are attacking each other. They're attacking it themselves, right? Your immune system maybe have an autoimmune thing where it's hurting itself. So I think about that, and I just think about flipping it around and scaling it up, right? When we're happy in a human community and we feel in right relationship with the people around us, and we can do what we want. We can't do everything. We can't do everything, but we can do some things. Those are generally things we want to do. And there's moments of inspiration. Maybe as a community we get together and we throw a really great 4th of July parade, right? Or we put together a really great concert, or somebody in our midst is immensely talented and we pull together as a community to pay for them to be able to go to a great conservatory somewhere and become a great musician. Like, these are the kinds of things that we do and can feel proud of ourselves. Right. And that latent joy and that aggregation of amazingness creates then a transhuman organism that is then thriving and humming. Right?
This is Byron's actually big theory. His last book that he wrote is We Are Agora.
Yeah.
And he compares humanity to a beehive. And a beehive, as a collective, maintains a certain temperature, which is which is distinct from an individual bee.
That's
which
right.
operates at a very cold temperature. And that humanity is, and the planet is a type of agora. It's kind of very Avatar in some way.
Yeah.
And that is another way to think about it. So a non kind of religious way to think about it is that there's something innate in natural selection about our connectiveness, that this consciousness awakening, et cetera, is happening because of this this biological need to not extinct ourselves. And therefore that there has to be some kind of unification versus this illusion of separation, and the realization that humanity, again, is 99.9% the same DNA-wise, and that the illusion of separation, the power games, as Gary Zukov would say in The Seed of the Soul, the world of form, or the five sensory human, that's where the suffering comes from, versus the realization of the connectiveness, what he calls the multi-sensory human. Now he takes it into a soul, which I agree with, and you and I probably don't agree on that, and that's fine.
Actually, I don't think we should talk about that. I don't think there's necessarily that much of a disagreement about it.
Well, tell me about that, because it's kind of, if we have a soul, which I believe we do. I also believe in reincarnation. We might divert on that, but I've read a lot of evidence on that, and I've seen people have really distinct experiences about past lives in either regression therapy or in psychedelic journeys or in near-death experiences. On the soul aspect, it pretty quickly takes me into divinity, that there's some cosmic, order that we can't understand. And I'm curious, being really rooted in science, I know I'm throwing a bunch of curveballs to you, so feel free to just stay focused on one. But I'm curious, how do you grapple with the miracle of the Big Bang? How there was this point of no entropy, and this tiny, and then boom.
I think, again, I sort of flippantly said earlier, we don't have a working theory of gravity, so let's not worry about billions of years in the past.
Right.
And to your point about dark energy, dark matter, we don't have a working theory of gravity yet. We have not unified relativity and really a wave theory of these kinds of large scale dynamics and the quantum. So I just don't think we should get ahead of ourselves. We're going to discover, if you take an honest look at how the Big Bang theory both originated and how it's been modified over time. There's a lot of stuff there where it's like, well, they got this data and they just had to figure out a way to explain this. And I'm not,
But that's science in general. There's a lot of postulates,
No. Hold on a second. I'll be very clear. I'm not trying to throw shade at any cosmologist, but at the same time, as a scientist, there's lots of science which is we think this is what's going to happen. We do the experiment that didn't happen, and then we scratch the theory and we do a different experiment.
Right. Sure.
You can't really do that with cosmology because you can't create another universe, right?
That's right.
And what we do know is as we notice things and we learn more things, we discover more things, and that's great. We should have kind of something, a sketch on the back of a napkin about what we think it currently looks like. But we could put up a better space telescope. We could put other things in space and do better figuring things out, and realize that a lot of our stuff is wrong. And so then this whole the Big Bang conception, I've just not, I've never particularly been convinced by it. I do know that the public demands some kind of a picture if you're going to ask for billions of dollars of funding. But at the end of the day, again, we don't have a working theory of gravity.
We don't.
Our cosmic distance ladder is somewhat fragile, and I think we're just kind of early.
Right.
The Greeks. And it's okay, but it's not okay when you have to, the public at large demands answers from all these smart eggheads, right? But if you look at the Greeks, the Greeks are very smart people, but they could not have figured out the actual, fusion cycle in the sun. They just didn't have the science yet to figure that out.
Right, of course, yeah. And I think we'll look back hundreds, definitely thousands of years from now, but even just hundreds of years from now, and we'll look back at wow, we were just so uneducated in terms of the scientific
Yeah,
reality.
like, can you believe they thought that? Like, I don't know, like it's not, so I'm just...
Because one of the things I'm super excited about in this exponential curve
is what they
is we're going to decode a lot of what our reality is, which is fantastic, you know. And
Fantastic,
I say let the science take us wherever it goes. Like, let's find out what the truth is. Like,
So I you know, to go back to your original question, I don't have to do a lot of grappling with the Big Bang because I think that's just placeholder theory for now.
Yeah. But what about a soul? Like,
so here's the thing. I do think that it is entirely possible that we are living on the three-dimensional surface of a much higher dimensional space, or inside. We're in a three-dimensional subspace of a much higher dimensional thing. And that the dynamics of those higher dimensions are what manifest into things like energy and other kinds of, you know, the geometry of higher dimensions becomes the dynamics of lower dimensions oftentimes. So, so it's for me, it's not like out off the table at all to say maybe there are things that we do in these three dimensions that then, and certain patterns of energy and certain patterns of evolution and certain kind of things form that then create some kind of a residual crease or a residual something in those higher dimensions that might stick around or might have whatever. There might be creatures that live in all these dimensions that just don't reduce themselves down to three dimensions and hang out with us. But they do things and certain things happen and we see the results of those things happening. So I'm not, again, I don't think...
We also don't know if this is the only universe.
Yeah, well, that's a whole different thing. So, on the geometry side,
multidimensionality.
I do have a perspective on that. But I will say, in terms of the current universe we're in, it is not off the table to talk about additional geometric dimensions and how those might affect these three dimensions. And inside that, you can have a lot of space for things like, oh, maybe, you know, there's actually a set of a really great set of science fiction novels for which, you know, in a key concept there is that consciousness, and when you get to the complexities of consciousness, anything that is able to have a qualia like that creates an imprint in these higher dimensions. Okay, I could accept that could be how it works. Like I know, like, I don't have any evidence that that's the case, but I also don't have any evidence that that couldn't mathematically be the case. Right. So that's sort of the epistemic openness I hold on those things. Multiple universes, however, I have a pretty hard opinion about that, which is I think that for the most part, a lot of people have a misunderstanding around quantum mechanics. And of course, it's extremely sexy. This goes back to the Western narcissism and hedonism. It's extremely sexy for us to think about ourselves as having the optionality to make lots of other decisions in all these other universes. And it's sort of a...
So you're not an Everett many worlds theory guy?
No. I think that... if you try to take the mystery of the double slit experiment and scale it up to this size, you get nothing but absurdities. Because the math of what happens at the quantum level, the math of what happens with the electromagnetic radiation and light, these kinds of things, those are physically real. Like entanglement is a thing. Like when I was 18, I was working at Los Alamos on quantum computing and on some interaction-free detection kind of experiments. Like, these quantum phenomena are real. Capital R real. And the interpretation of the mathematics is where things kind of go quickly off the rails, right? So I have, I think like two things that are very popular for people, I think, in science fiction, but I absolutely do not believe in at all, are many worlds, you know, sort of multiverse kind of things, and time travel. So those are two things which are just for me completely off the table. So anyways, I do think, however, that relative to a soul concept, that maybe there is some sort of thing where what we can access in the reality we live in this mostly three-dimensional world, does actually have a deeper shadow or a crease or some manifestation in higher dimensions. And in those dimensions, there's phenomena that happen that we engage with that might lead to phenomenological things, like these kind of out-of-body things, or you know, other things like telepathy and things like that.
Do you think there's
you sort of see the hard realist part of me, right? Like,
no, I understand. I mean, trust me, I definitely know. I mean, these are the things I think very deeply about, and in reading these books, because I very much love science, embrace science. It's like I said, this is the time of the great philosophers. Like, you know, what is the purpose of us being here? Is there some grand cosmic, you know, play unfolding? And one of the things I'm so excited about is this acceleration to actually decode what our reality is. I mean, I think that's going to be absolutely fantastic. And, again, no matter where it goes, I don't have an attachment to where it goes as long as we have an understanding of this is actually the truth.
Right.
And, this is just a total random aside, but, you probably have an opinion on this, but out of all the things that we could know scientifically, let's say 100%, my guess is that right now, evolutionarily, we're at maybe the 2 to 3% mark. That there are so many things that we are going to discover that are going to blow our minds.
That seems like an overstatement, honestly. I don't think we're anywhere close to that.
Even close to that?
No.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. So you're at the 1% mark or something? Less than that. Okay.
We discovered...
Well, that's exciting.
Yeah, 100 years ago, we thought other galaxies were spiral nebula.
Right.
100 years ago.
Yep.
100 years ago, we thought the Milky Way was kind of it. This is our universe. And there's these spiral nebula. And then we started realizing, oh, holy crap.
Yeah.
Those things are really far away. Right? 100 years ago. 150 years ago, we barely, I think, what was J.J. Thomson's oil drop experiment? We barely knew about we certainly didn't know about the neutron.
Yeah.
We barely figured out about the electron 150 years ago.
Yeah.
We're just, chaos theory and complexity and the Mandelbrot set and Julia sets.
Yeah.
The idea that iterated
Yeah.
systems can lead to emergent behaviors.
Yeah.
That's the 60s. That was 60 years ago.
Yeah. Have you ever watched Inner Worlds, Outer Worlds?
No.
It's a documentary. You can get it on YouTube for free, and it's on a number of streaming channels. But it basically is this unification between science and spirituality, and takes you very deep into the Fibonacci sequence and all types, and relating it to ancient scripture. It's really fascinating. I just think you would enjoy it.
Oh, great! Yeah.
Because it's very deep on science too.
There are, I think Stephen Wolfram obviously has gone full nerd into this stuff, right? But when you look at math and you look at the things that emerge straight from the math, you're like, there's something here, right?
Yeah.
And so I think we are just scratching the surface, so to speak. And I have these daydreams about the sci-fi novels that could be written and whatnot. That really if you look at the universe, there's a couple of things that are interesting. Whenever there is an abundance, this is, I guess, Ilya Prigozhin, so a fellow Texan, his observation, right, that when you have these, systems that have energy coming into them, they form structures in order to dissipate the energy faster, right? And so the idea of forming structures, anytime, so this is the thing, it wasn't until I'd graduated college, I think, that I really started to understand and think about this, but when we study thermodynamics and we look at closed systems, there's a decay and there's settlement into sort of this equilibrium state. But this is the kind of entropic heat death that everyone talks about, right, in the universe. But you know what? There's no closed systems that we generally deal with. We generally are looking at deeply non-equilibrium states in a universe filled with things that have a lot of incoming energy and dissipation happening.
Right.
And in these kinds of open systems, when energy pours in, nature seems to produce patterns and order all the time.
Yeah.
And so there's something there. You can't, as a phenomenologist, and look at that and say, well, let's not talk about that, right? You have to look at that and you have to talk about it. And so then if you say, well, that's just us looking at it from a very crude, energy perspective. But what if there's something to that energy? What if there's flavor and color and all sorts of things in that energy?
Yeah.
So when the sun is basking us in this energy, it's not just throwing off random, photons really, right? And gamma rays and other things. It's actually bombarding us with a certain set of things that this Earth happens to be a vessel for certain kinds of things to grow.
Yeah.
And it's on us to prove to the sun, this goes back to a sun god theory almost, it's on us to prove that we actually can do something interesting with that energy.
Yeah.
And so there's all sorts of stuff that we've sort of, I think it's really disappointing that so much sci-fi just is so, again, just navel-gazing fixated on, but what if the bad guys had laser guns?
Yeah.
It's well, then it's just the same as the samurai movies, but with laser guns. Let's tell a more interesting story, right?
Yeah, I have a friend who is focused on decoding light, that, let there be light, that everything starts with light, and that light is the ultimate biohack, that you can use light to increase hair regrowth. You can use light to decrease aging. You can use light to increase performance. I mean, there's a lot of evidence for this. They've been doing a lot of studies and they have a lot of patents. But I'm curious, this is a little bit of a vector. I find it really fascinating on the less than 1% that we actually understand today. What is your opinion on if AI will ever be able to manifest sentience or consciousness in an AI, like that it will have qualia like we do as human beings? And this is the age-old human psyche of the Terminator or the Matrix scenario, that we create something that's so vastly intelligent, it's as conscious as we are.
I guess the sort of the stupidest possible answer, I guess. Like, I haven't really thought about that too much because I sort of assumed it to be true. So I guess my answer is I do think it's true. And I sort of assumed it would be true almost by definition, because we can grow most biology in vats, essentially, at this point. We're not really at the point where we're eating lab-grown meat, but like the biological processes are fairly well understood. And so, we can, we can take children are born premature now. They can be born extremely premature, and we actually have the science technology to keep them alive. Essentially, almost in an external womb. It's crazy what we can do now to save these young babies. We have been doing scientific research with 1% of the population. And each one of those people that constitute that 1% run on 20 watts, of brain power. So if you go and throw gigawatts, even if it's less efficient, at these problems, it seems to me inevitable that we will be able to essentially have brains in the vat. They may not be human brains. They may not have the quality of human bodies living in this kind of embodied way. But whatever it is, the idea that somehow our computational substrates within this small amount of volume is the end all and be all, is all it could be, seems like a very, very large assumption. Like it seems like that's the assumption, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating subject. Like, how do you square it with soul? Like if we have the ability to do that with a machine, will it have a soul like we have?
Well, I think it depends on what you mean by soul. I guess that's sort of the non-answer. If you get to the point, if you accept the argument, I'm trying to make the argument in increments here, right? How all great proofs are done. Let's do it in increments. So if we say that, look, we can keep a rat brain alive in a jar, and we can plumb in various things and basically have it drive a car around as if it had vision. I don't think it's too far-fetched to say that we could do that. We've certainly done these things with cockroach brains now. You can wire cockroaches onto little driving cars, and they'll drive the car. So to go to a rat brain, and if you get to a rat brain, you're at a cat brain. If you get at a cat brain, you're at a pig brain, right? So again, like the idea of us being able to have a functioning brain in a jar is not far-fetched. The human ethics of this, like however we want to square that circle, maybe some people in near-death situations, they will volunteer for their brains to be put through this process. And they have a trusted friend, family member who is able to pull the plug if they're, suffering in pain or something. But like whatever it is, you can imagine us getting to a point where we're starting to do this with human brains in jars, right? Well, at that point, it'd be hard to argue that human brain in that jar, with fully intact memories of its childhood, being able to answer very, very deep CAPTCHA questions about what was your favorite teacher in high school, or whatever it is. Like, you can start being like, okay, well maybe that human brain in that jar actually does manifest somewhat of a soul. Especially if wired up to actuators and they can drive a Segway around or something, right? So you go from that to like, well, let's just take 2 human brains in 2 jars and connect them with like a super high bandwidth connection. Now what do you have? Do you have less soul or do you have more soul? Is the soul exactly 2.0 times, a standard human soul unit? Or is it more? Is it 2.5 times? Because if it's 2.1, now you got a problem. Because if I hook up 3, then is it 3.6? Is it 3.3?
This is very Ray Kurzweilian.
It is, but
did you read
it's
the singularity is near?
Exactly. I just don't see how we don't get there. And I'm not trying to sweep under the rug any of the complexities in the engineering, the bio side of this. I'm not trying to sweep under the rug any of the ethics of it. Here's the thing. All of us who are concerned about the ethics of this, those of us sitting in comfy chairs here in the West, there are plenty of people in the rest of the world who do not have these ethics around this, who will use political prisoners for these experiments, who will do these kinds of things. And now, if you look at going all the way back to how we started the conversation, $500 billion for Stargate. I want to pull one data point out for you, which is that a few years ago, I don't know if you remember, there was a Chinese scientist who announced that they had done a human clone.
I remember.
And then he got yoinked off the stage.
Yep.
A formal sort of statement was made that this is a violation of the ethics, all the stuff.
Yeah.
And he was never heard from again.
Yep.
So what do you think are the chances that they being anyone else in the world who has the facility, who has the sovereign money to fund these kinds of things, what do you think are the chances that they stop doing human clone experiments? When you clone super babies, when let's say you had a one child policy that inadvisably created a massive male female imbalance, right? What if you have a population decline that's coming, and you could actually say create super babies that had 5 extra IQ points on average and had no congenital kind of issues or problems, will all be strong, grow to 6 feet tall, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
Why wouldn't you do that every day of the week and twice on Sunday?
Yeah.
So the human cloning stuff, all these kinds of things. It, to me, seems like it is inevitable that this will happen. If not from state sovereign entities, it will be private labs from billionaires. Absolutely. So another data point, maybe people didn't read this, but there was a really interesting article, I think in New York or Atlantic or something, where they talked about Chinese billionaires and even centimillionaires paying for surrogate babies by the dozens to, in one case, 100 or so. Here in the U.S. And adoption and surrogate, agencies were struggling to deal with this problem because you had these were Chinese business people who had a lot of money, and they're like, we'll make 10 babies. Have a thriving, this will be my business empire because it just goes back to almost like the Habsburg kind of thing. We'll have this child, they can marry that child of that business person, and that will seal our fates as a business partnership. This is literally what they were thinking as they went and literally spawned a dozen offspring. So that same mentality would almost certainly say yes to lab-grown clones, lab-grown, hyper-optimized super babies, all these kinds of things.
Right.
And if they had, the Chinese have been obsessed with mortality forever, right? The magical peach that if you eat that you have long life. These are the things that the Chinese have been obsessed with forever as a culture.
Right.
So if you actually have just a few steps from there to being able to actually create an immortal vessel to put your brain in, and to maybe even make that brain even bigger and have it connect to a hive mind of additional brains, I don't see people saying no to that, man.
Yeah.
I'm not celebrating any of this.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to play out of my mind the game theoretic of what is almost certainly to come.
Yeah.
And if China does that, it'll be China because they have the advanced technology and they also have the money in the private sector to pay for these things. If China does that and they create a special economic zone, every VC in the West is going to fly over there and do that as well. There's no question in my mind. Everyone will do that. So that's going to be what humanity is going to be.
Right. Wow. That's.
all the tech billionaires too. They would do it. In a heartbeat.
This is definitely making me think of chapter 3 of The Singularity is Nearer. That chapter is called "Who Am I?"
Yeah.
And so I'd recommend people read that if they want to think.
It's a great book. It's been around forever.
Yeah.
He wrote it a long time ago.
Well, no, I'm talking about The Singularity is Nearer.
Oh, Nearer. Okay,
he came out with that in 2024. But he reaffirmed in that book his prediction from The Singularity is Near that AGI would be created in 2029. That was he was laughed off the stage when he came out with The Singularity is Near when he said 2029, because back then people were assuming 2045 to 2055. So they're like, he's completely, just way overly optimistic about this exponential curve. But I think, we had the Moltbook thing, et cetera.
I think that we may have set the bar too high for AGI in the sense that when I say too high, I mean, not that we've made the problem too hard, but just that we've set the bar so artificially high that it blinds us to recognizing when it's already here. And in a sense, if you're scared about AGI coordination driving and creating bad outcomes for humans, then it's already here. To some extent, all of the networks that connect a lot of our trading systems and communication systems that allow these egregores to emerge, well, the egregores are here already. They're already doing things to us. Nobody wants it, but everyone has to do it because that's already here. It's a locked dynamic. If you say, well, an AGI is more agentic and has more of a goal seek in mind, maybe, and it's going to do something explicitly to manipulate humans, that kind of AGI taking over one of these egregores, yeah, that might be still a few years in the future, but not that many years in the future.
Right.
And when it does, it will use these same mechanisms. It doesn't have to it doesn't have to dress up in a Terminator suit.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to live in the sky like Skynet. Like you can just use all the mechanisms of oppression we already have.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, wow, that's a really dark thing to end the podcast like this.
I'm trying to.
But I think you have to call the enemy. You have to see what the enemy looks like and be realistic about it.
No,
right?
I do think you have to, and that's a big part of the reason I'm doing this and writing the book. And really what my purpose with this is to help humanity have a heart shift. Because we do have control over what future we want and explicit decisions along the way. And I think that's why the rediscovery of the spiritual path versus the dogmatic separation between science and spirituality. And I like the way you blend the two together, and hold out the possibility, because there's a lot of dogma on both sides. Part of the thing that's super unique about this podcast is weaving both of those things together. Like usually like a capitalist like you and me, would have a podcast that just touches on capitalism or just goes into AI, does not touch on spirituality, does not go there. And a spirituality podcast typically is not going to go into anything capitalistically, right? And so I think this dogmatic separation is part of the suffering for humanity. But yeah, we should probably end it there, because I know we're
we go on for hours. Yeah.
I mean, I know that you have a big heart for humanity, that you really want us to make it to that age of abundance for all. The path is going to be interesting. It's going to be very interesting to see the next 10 to 15 years play out. And, you and I and many others are going to be there to help guide. So, it's
that's sort of our job.
It takes team humanity. Yes, for sure. Yeah. With great power comes great responsibility. And we're manifesting technologies as humanity now that are the greatest powers we've ever manifested. And we're just barely over 3 years into it.
It's amazing.
Which is amazing. That just blows my mind. But hey, I appreciate your heart, brother.
Right.
Thank you so much.
So
Honestly, we
Thank
could
you.
go for like 4 hours. This could be like a Lex Friedman style podcast, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, thanks again, everybody, for tuning in to Love Conquers Fear. Amazing guest lineup coming up. I am fully booked. Keep all the love coming. I have daily conversations about people having a heart shift, diving into different books that we've covered on this. It's a really beautiful journey that I'm on with all of you, and please keep sharing it out there. I'm self-funding this. My whole purpose, you just heard it, is really to help humanity have a heart shift collectively, so that we make it together to this age of abundance for all. It's going to take team humanity. Thanks again.